What was the world like before the flood? A world lost in time, where life was long, humans coexisted with giants, and civilizations thrived in a land full of mysteries. This is the world before the flood, an era that ignites the curiosity and imagination of many. The Bible, in its opening chapters, provides only a glimpse of this forgotten time, where humanity, despite its great achievements, plunged into an abyss of corruption and sin. What were the people like? What was their daily life like? What happened before the waters of the flood turned everything into silence? Get ready as we explore this fascinating and dark chapter of human history together. And to ensure you don't miss any of the mysteries we uncover, subscribe to the B side of the Bible and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on all our content. After being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve began a new life, far from the lost perfection. They became the first pioneers of an uncharted world, giving rise to a civilization that grew on the margins of a broken promise of immortality. This pre-flood world was a wild land, rich in possibilities and threats, where every step was an act of survival and every decision was an attempt to understand what it meant to exist outside the direct presence of God. Adam and Eve were not alone. Their sons and daughters also inhabited this land marked by sin and the longing for the paradise they had lost. Cain, the firstborn, embodied the beginning of a new era for humanity, an era of great achievements but also profound tragedies. Marked by envy and anger, Cain became history's first murderer, killing his brother Abel in an act of violence that would echo throughout the human lineage. After the crime, Cain was cursed by God, carrying a mark that identified him as the man who shed innocent blood. In his exile, Cain built the first city mentioned in the Bible, Enoch. Imagine this city growing in the vastness of a primitive world, a cluster of lives trying to organize themselves amid the moral chaos that was already beginning to take root. It was the beginning of an embryonic urbanization, where every structure erected told a story of hope and fear. Cities were symbols of progress, but also of decay. Cain's descendants became inventors and artists, mastering herding, music, and metallurgy. It was a society that, despite its rapid progress, advanced upon the ruins of a sin that would never be forgotten. But amid this scene of achievements, a dark atmosphere loomed. Each invention carried a dual nature, innovation for good, but also the potential for evil. The work with bronze and iron was not just about creating tools for daily use, but also weapons of war. Although cities were centers of progress, they became stages for intrigue, violence, and moral decline. What could have been a rebirth turned into a spiral of destruction. This was the hallmark of pre-flood society, a civilization walking a thin line between splendor and corruption, between human creativity and the depravity that spread like a plague. Biblical accounts do not detail the architecture or daily life of the people, but we can imagine streets filled with merchants, children running, and families trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while evil spread through the generations. It would have been a vibrant world on the surface, but with deep cracks that foreshadowed impending disaster. The achievements were a testament to human capacity, but also a reflection of how far humanity had strayed from its divine origins. Every hammer strike, every melody that played, every flock that grazed told a story of a people living on the brink of the abyss. And it is within this paradoxical setting that the pre-flood world was shaped. a place where progress walked hand in hand with moral decay. The city of Enoch, founded on spilled blood, stood as a monument to humanity's glories and failures. Cain and his descendants, far from seeking redemption, chose a path of earthly conquests but spiritual emptiness. Cain's legacy was more than just one of progress. It was a silent testament to how humanity, even in its most creative moments, could lose itself in the shadows of its own darkness. Cain's children were known for their extraordinary skills. Jabal, one of the first to stand out, introduced a new way of life for his people by establishing herding. It was not merely raising cattle. It was a quiet revolution that allowed tribes to settle in specific areas, care for their flocks, ensure food, and sustain their families. Jubal, his brother, led humanity into a new dimension of expression by introducing music, with sounds never heard before, filling the air with melodies that echoed across the land. It was as if, through music, people tried to capture a lost fragment of paradise, an emotional connection that allowed them to dream even in a world filled with pain and violence. Then came Tubal-Cain, the master of the forges, whose skill in shaping metals like bronze and iron not only made daily work easier but also forever changed how men faced the world around them. More resilient tools and sharper weapons emerged from the blazing furnaces, marking the beginning of an era of power and domination. In his hands, metal came to life, transformed into instruments that could both create and destroy. This mastery over metal symbolized not just technological advancement, but also mankind's growing ability to impose its will upon the earth and its fellow men. But while men's hands worked tirelessly to shape the future, their hearts drifted further away from God. Each invention, no matter how brilliant, carried the specter of corruption, for what was created for good often became tools of oppression and war. The accounts of humans living for hundreds of years also reveal a crucial factor in this explosion of knowledge. Generations coexisted and shared their experiences directly. Men like Adam, who lived nearly 1,000 years, could have personally recounted the stories of the Garden of Eden to their descendants, keeping alive the memory of a time no one else could see. This direct contact between generations allowed knowledge to be transmitted almost intact, without the distortions that time and death usually bring. The longevity of human life was perhaps one of the greatest assets of the cultural development of that era, as each individual accumulated an amount of knowledge that we today can barely imagine. But within this boiling pot of inventions and ancestral wisdom, the pre-flood society also harbored invisible dangers. The line between genius and madness seemed increasingly thin, and the same minds that created brilliant solutions for everyday challenges were capable of devising the worst perversities. Technological development brought with it a disturbing moral sophistication, where right and wrong mingled in ways never before experienced. It was a time of extremes, where the light of progress shone brightly but always with a menacing shadow lurking behind. Cities that were meant to be bastions of civilization became hotbeds of decay, and art and science, which had promised so much, also contributed to the spiral of corruption. Music, so beautiful and inspiring, could easily be used to lull dark rituals. The tools that made daily life easier also served to promote violence, and the knowledge passed from father to son was often twisted to serve selfish purposes. Thus, pre-flood civilization was a mosaic of achievements and failures, a reflection of humanity that, in its desire to rise again, ended up sinking even further. In the end, what emerged was a society that, despite all its advancements, was on the brink of moral collapse. Innovation was not enough to save a civilization that had already lost its spiritual compass. With each step forward, humanity drifted further from its divine essence, surrendering to a path of destruction that would inevitably culminate in the flood. The people of that time, with all their brilliance, could not foresee the disaster that their own hands were helping to construct, and the story they were writing would be washed away by the waters that would soon come to erase the marks of an era as brilliant as it was doomed. Longevity was both a blessing and a burden, allowing generations to coexist and share experiences in a way that would be impossible today. Imagine living long enough to meet your great-great-grandchildren, to watch the world change before your eyes for nearly a millennium. Adam lived 930 years, Methuselah reached an astonishing 969, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood finally descended upon the earth. This was a reality where time seemed to stretch infinitely, giving men not only the opportunity to build, but also to corrupt deeply. Extended life gave men the chance to perfect their skills, deepen their knowledge, and develop cultures and technologies in ways we can only imagine today. The stories of the Garden of Eden, the original sin, and the early generations of humanity were not merely legends told by distant ancestors, but living memories passed down directly by those who had been there. This direct contact with the past shaped the mindsets and influenced the behavior of people, as each generation faced not only the wisdom of the elders, but also the warnings of a time when man lived in communion with God. Each new invention, each technological advancement, seemed to carry a moral and spiritual weight that connected the present with a distant past. What a man learned at 100 years old could be refined and taught over the next 800, resulting in a culture of mastery that is almost unimaginable to us. But this longevity also allowed evil to take root deeply and broadly. With each new generation, the knowledge of good and evil was transmitted, and the lessons that should have been learned were lost in human rebellion. Corruption repeated and refined itself, becoming a vicious cycle that dragged on for centuries. Violence, moral decay, and the relentless pursuit of power perpetuated and intensified, further staining a humanity that had already lost its way. Living for so many years meant witnessing progress and the accumulation of sins that became almost impossible to redeem. This prolongation of human life also created a society where time was viewed entirely differently. There was no rush, and decisions were made with the patience of those who had centuries ahead of them. Alliances and enmities unfolded over generations, with conflicts that could last hundreds of years and resentment that spanned centuries. Each mistake reverberated for decades, shaping not only the life of those who committed it, but also their descendants, who inherited both heroic deeds and legacies of hatred and violence. Longevity was thus a double-edged sword, prolonging both the glory and disgrace of an era marked by the duality between light and darkness. Yet, as knowledge flourished, human nature continued to deteriorate. The same men who were capable of creating wonders also accumulated decades of resentment, envy, and arrogance. Living for so long meant bearing the weight of many mistakes and poor decisions, seeing themselves reflected in each subsequent generation and feeling the guilt of actions that helped shape the destiny of the earth. It was an existence that defied the laws of time and morality, where each additional year was an opportunity to create, as well as a new chance for evil to manifest and strengthen. This extension of life also allowed figures like Noah to stand out as beacons in the darkness. His prolonged life gave him time to listen, learn, and, above all, resist. As corruption spread everywhere, Noah remained faithful, watching generation after generation sink deeper into sin. He witnessed firsthand how longevity could turn a man into both a sage and a despot. Noah was a survivor not just of a time, but of an entire era of decadence, representing the last hope of redemption for a humanity that already seemed condemned. And so, longevity, which could have been a divine gift to man, became an instrument of his own judgment. Time, which stretched like a golden carpet ahead of every life, eventually revealed the deep cracks of the human soul. Each year lived was a silent witness to the glories and failures of a civilization that advanced but also lost itself more with each step. In the days leading up to the flood, one of the most disturbing events in pre-flood history began to unfold before the eyes of men: the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. This forbidden mixture was not merely a physical transgression, but a milestone of how deeply humanity had deviated from its original purpose. The term sons of God has been interpreted by many as fallen angels, beings who dared to challenge the boundaries between the divine and the mortal, producing a progeny that carried both superhuman strength and moral depravity. This was an alliance that should never have happened, a union that violated sacred order and destabilized the fragile balance of the world. These sons of God were not mere common men. They were entities possessing knowledge and power beyond human comprehension. When they united with the daughters of men, they were not just mixing blood, but entire worlds. The result of this union was a generation of hybrid beings who belonged neither wholly to heaven nor entirely to earth. They were imposing and unsettling figures, carrying an aura that blended the mystical and the terrifying. Each birth of these beings was a sign that things were spiraling out of control, that the world had become a field of forbidden and unpredictable experiments. The daughters of men were seduced by promises beyond what any mortal could offer. These women became involved with beings who promised them power that transcended the ordinary. The pure lineage of men, which was supposed to preserve divine teachings, was being tainted by an unthinkable mixture that compromised humanity's future. The fruit of these unions was a lineage that bore a legacy of uncontrolled power, marking the beginning of an era of giants and warriors whose deeds would become legends, but whose actions would hasten the world's ruin. The Nephilim, described in Scripture as giants and men of renown, are among the most intriguing mysteries of the pre-flood world. These creatures, shrouded in legends and speculations, represented both a threat and a fascination for the people of that era. The mention of the Nephilim in the book of Genesis is brief, but their impact on human history is profound. These giants walked among men, imposing and powerful, figures that defied everything we know about human existence. They were not merely beings of great stature. They were living symbols of an era where the extraordinary and the sinister mingled. This was a generation that respected no limits. The new beings, hybrids of a profane alliance, began to dominate, imposing their will over common men and establishing an era of tyranny and disorder. It was as if the world itself was being rewritten by the hands of those who belonged neither to the realm of the heavens nor the domain of mortals. These creatures saw themselves as superior, scorning common humanity and positioning themselves as gods in a world that had lost control over its own creation. Arrogance and brutality became the trademarks of these beings, who knew neither reverence nor boundaries. For those living under the shadow of the Nephilim, life was not just about surviving the elements, but also against beings that seemed to belong to a different reality. Imagine a time when giants walked among cities and villages, figures larger than life, defying the laws of nature. The mere existence of these beings suggests that the pre-flood world was far more complex and terrifying than anything we can imagine today. They were warriors, leaders, and for many, lesser gods whose exploits became legends sung for generations. The influence of these hybrids on society was devastating. Where there had once been room for repentance and the pursuit of redemption, now only the shadows of uncontrolled power remained. They dominated politics, commerce, and even faith. Temples that had once been places of meeting between God and man were now filled with strange rituals, tributes to the dark powers that had infiltrated the earth. Religious practices were corrupted, with sacrifices and rites that drove men further and further from true communion with the Creator. It was a time when the sacred and the profane blended so thoroughly that no one knew where humanity ended and distorted divinity began. The union between the sons of God and the daughters of men symbolized a breaking point, a moment when humanity crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Cities that were once centers of innovation and progress had become fortresses of an uncontested power. Accounts from these times speak of common men being oppressed, crushed by a force they did not fully understand but that kept them in constant fear. The earth, once seen as a divine gift, was transforming into a battleground between forces that should never have come into contact. Peace and order were distant memories, replaced by uncertainty and anarchy. Divine judgment was approaching, and those who looked to the heavens knew that something was about to happen. The earth was no longer a safe home, but a stage where the worst of the human spirit and supernatural forces manifested. Thus, the stage was set for the ultimate intervention. The forbidden union between the sons of God and the daughters of men was the spark that ignited an era of irreversible chaos. It was the final act of a foretold tragedy, where the sacred had been irreparably profaned and the balance of the world had been destroyed by those who refused to recognize any authority beyond their own desire. And it was amid this chaotic scenario that Noah and his family found themselves isolated, trying to keep their faith while the world around them crumbled. The Nephilim represented the pinnacle of human decadence and the forbidden mixture that so displeased God. They were the dark guardians of an era that refused to acknowledge its mistakes, and their presence was a constant reminder that the flood was not merely a punishment. It was a necessity. The world was so contaminated that only a direct and drastic intervention could restore the lost balance. When the waters of the flood began to fall, they were not only cleansing the earth of human sins, but also erasing the legacy of the Nephilim. The rain that covered the earth was the final sentence against those who had usurped their place and corrupted what was sacred. The giants, who once dominated and terrorized, were swept away by the relentless force of the waters, and their stories became mere echoes of a lost past. What remained were the fragmented memories of an era when men lived side by side with monsters and, because of this, paid the highest price. This dark chapter of the pre-flood world serves as a reminder of how far humanity can go when it ignores the boundaries set by God. The Nephilim were more than giants. They were the amplified reflection of a civilization that had become unrecognizable. And as the flood erased their traces, the memory of their existence continued to echo as an eternal warning. What happens when man tries to be more than he should, crossing the invisible lines drawn for his protection? Amidst the growing corruption and complete disorder, two figures emerged as beacons in a dark night: Enoch and Noah. They were different, men who walked against the tide of depravity that engulfed the earth. In a time when faith was fading and violence was celebrated, these men remained faithful to a higher calling, a mission that transcended human ambitions and echoed directly from the heavenly throne. They were the exception in a lost generation, a testimony that even in the densest darkness, light could still shine. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, was a man who walked with God in an unparalleled way. He did not merely perform rituals. He lived in a state of constant communion, in an intimacy with the Creator that set him apart from all those around him. Enoch did not just speak of God. He experienced him so deeply that his fate was unique. He was taken by God without experiencing death. The Bible offers few details about this extraordinary departure, but it is enough to capture the imagination. A man so upright and close to God that he was spared the common fate of mortals, escaping the cold grip of death and being taken into the unknown. The story of Enoch is a reminder of what unshakable faith can achieve. While the society around him sank into sin, Enoch lived as a prophet of the Most High, warning of the judgment that was approaching but which few were willing to hear. He was a living sign that human behavior would not go unpunished, a harbinger of the judgment that was about to fall upon the earth. Enoch saw the future and announced the consequences of unchecked rebellion, but the world, blind in its arrogance, continued its path toward self-destruction. His sudden and mysterious absence was like a final warning to a generation that had exhausted all chances of redemption. But while Enoch was taken before chaos reached its peak, Noah remained as the last righteous man in a corrupt land. He did not just live amid evil. He faced it daily, standing firm in his devotion. Noah was an ordinary man with an extraordinary heart, someone who refused to bow to the corruption that reigned around him. When God looked at the world and saw that all flesh had become corrupt, he found in Noah a different man, someone worthy of a special calling. Noah was given an impossible mission: to build an ark to save the remaining life, a vessel that defied human logic and comprehension. Noah worked amid the scorn and disbelief of a society that had lost any sense of fear of God. Each hammer strike was an act of faith. Each plank placed on the ark was a declaration of trust and a promise that no one else could see. He became the solitary figure of resistance, a man building a refuge in a world that despised him. While the voices around him mocked and scorned his work, Noah pressed on, obeying divine instructions with a precision that reflected his reverence and his hope. The construction of the ark, far more than a simple project, was God's final attempt to preserve creation before the ultimate judgment. Noah gathered the animals, species by species, as time ran against him. Each pair of creatures entering the ark represented a fragment of the world that could still be saved, a small flame of hope amid the growing darkness. Noah was not just saving the animals. He was carrying with him humanity's last chance for a new beginning. His family, the only remaining members of a lineage that still feared God, became the core of an uncertain future, about to face the greatest storm the world had ever seen. Enoch and Noah, though separated by generations, were connected by a faith that transcended the ages. They were the last witnesses of a world that had forgotten God, lights that shone brightly even when the darkness seemed invincible. Their story is a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit when guided by faith, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is still room for the divine to act. Noah survived the wrath of the waters, but never forgot the lessons of the world that had been lost. The flood cleansed the earth, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another, where mankind would have the chance to start over, but should never forget the cost of ignoring the warnings of heaven. The decisive moment was approaching. The skies, once calm and distant, now closed over the earth with a silent threat, as the world blindly continued its routine of excess and sin. It was as if all creation were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The last righteous ones were locked inside the ark, the refuge built with sweat, faith, and obedience. Outside, what remained of humanity continued their lives as if nothing were going to happen. Laughter, cries, and celebrations persisted, unaware that they were about to be silenced forever by the waters gathering in the clouds, ready to descend with a force never before seen. Then, the first thunder shattered the silence. A rift in the sky opened, and the waters began to pour down. But this was no ordinary rain. It was a torrent that came from all directions, as if the very heavens and the depths of the earth were conspiring to wash the world of its corruption. The springs of the great deep broke open, violently spewing water and flooding everything in their path. The intensity of the catastrophe was unimaginable. The waters rose rapidly, swallowing fields, cities, forests, and all the monuments of human pride. What had once been a vibrant planet now became a vast, gray sea, relentless and endless. Panic spread like wildfire. Men and women who had previously ignored Noah's warnings now ran in desperation, seeking shelter where none could be found. The ark, which they had so scorned, now floated as the last remnant of a lost civilization. They pounded on its closed doors, pleading for mercy, but it was too late. God had given ample time for repentance, but human pride had rejected the chance. Now, divine justice fell with full fury. The scene was apocalyptic. Mountains disappeared beneath the waters, trees were uprooted, and all of creation seemed to tremble under the weight of an inexorable judgment. Inside the ark, Noah and his family listened to the sounds of the flood, unable to see what was happening outside. It was an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of the waters and the creaking of the wood that bravely withstood the storm. Each passing day was a testament to the devastation of the world they once knew. The ark swayed on the waves, carrying not only the survivors, but also the weight of a history that was being erased. Outside, everything that had once been pride, power, and greatness dissolved under the relentless advance of the waters. The era of giants, heroes, and tyrants was being swept away, along with all the memories of a time that would never return. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the ark continued to drift, solitary in a vast ocean that seemed endless. In his silent contemplation, Noah understood that this was not merely an act of destruction, but also one of renewal. God had not simply destroyed the world. He was giving it a chance for a new beginning, a fresh start grounded in the obedience and faith that remained in a handful of lives. The ark floated over the waters that buried the past, holding within it the seeds of a future uncertain but possible. When the rains finally ceased and the waters began to recede, the world that emerged was unrecognizable. Landscapes had changed. The old landmarks of civilization were buried under layers of mud and debris. Noah and his family stepped into a silent world, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with a new story. They were the first of a new era, the keepers of the memories of a time that would exist only in tales and the recollection of future generations. The rainbow that appeared in the sky was more than a promise. It was a reminder that no matter how dark things become, there is always a chance to begin again. From that day on, the world would be rebuilt from the ashes of the old. Noah, the last of the righteous, became the father of a new humanity, destined to remember forever the lessons of the flood. The mark of that cataclysm would be etched into the souls of the survivors, a silent warning of the dangers of ignoring divine order. The waters had taken everything but left behind a chance, an opportunity for humanity to rediscover its purpose and live according to what God had planned from the beginning. The end of the pre-flood world was more than the conclusion of an era. It was a rebirth, a turning point that echoes today as a warning to all future generations. What happened in Noah's days was not just a tale of destruction, but a story of hope, new beginnings, and redemption. And so, as the waters finally settled and the new world emerged before Noah's eyes, the sky opened a new chapter in the history of humanity, leaving behind the ruins of a past that would forever serve as a powerful reminder that even the mightiest of worlds can be erased when one forgets who truly holds the command. The world before the flood serves as a warning to us. Jesus Christ mentioned that in the last days, humanity will live as in those times, consumed by pleasures, ignoring divine warnings. Are we living in a world that resembles the pre-flood era? The story we have just told is not merely a narrative of a lost time, but an echo of warning to all of us. How will we respond to the call to repentance? What will we do with the time we have left? The flood came and took everyone by surprise. What awaits us? Share your thoughts in the comments about the pre-flood world. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Let's continue exploring the mysteries of the Bible together, learning more about our past and what it can teach us about the future.